Hello, welcome to Phantom Homicide, into the chilling history of Charles Manson and the family.
Hi. Yeah, this is a deep dive that takes us right into the black heart of the 1960s.
Hey,
It's a time that promised peace, but what it delivered, at least in this story, was one of the most brutal, most baffling crime sprees in American history.
Absolutely. And we're looking at Charles Manson here, not just, a simple criminal. He was a master manipulator, a failed musician with grudges, and a cult leader his absolute command over his followers. It resulted in at least 9 confirmed murders.
That number, 9 confirmed.
Yeah.
And we'll get into why that's likely just the start.
Exactly. The journey we're taking you on today, it's kind of critical because it's a shortcut, really, to understanding how the American psyche just shifted, almost overnight. We're moving from that idealism, the summer of love, to the sight of blood, literally written on the walls of suburban homes.
Yeah.
So the mission today, our deep dive, is to untangle this twisted path. How did a career convict, someone who basically grew up in institutions, take the counterculture, use massive amounts of LSD, and blend it all with this apocalyptic prophecy? How did he achieve such terrifying absolute obedience?
We really have to understand the source of that power. Where did it come from? So we'll trace his deeply chaotic origins, decades spent in institutions. We'll explore his surprising and frankly pretty dangerous connections into the Hollywood fringe.
Right, the Beach Boys connection, Terry Melcher.
Exactly. And we'll watch as his ideology of helter-skelter develops, how it morphs into a justification for actual slaughter. And then we have to break down the murders themselves, the confirmed ones, Tate LaBianca, and then the shadows. The vast number of suspected murders that really define the family's dark legacy.
Okay, let's start unpacking this. And like any good crime story, we have to begin at the origin, right? Before the guru, before the killer, he was just Charles Mills Maddox, born 1934. And his start in life, well, stable is not the word.
Not at all. Stability was completely foreign. His mother, Ada Kathleen Maddox, was only 16 when he was born. His biological father, Colonel Walker Henderson Scott Sr. And we should probably note, Colonel was just his name, not a military rank. He was apparently a con artist.
Figures.
Yeah. He quickly abandoned the family. Manson never knew him. He ended up keeping the last name Manson from his mother's first husband, William Eugene Manson.
And that instability wasn't just emotional, was it? It turned criminal very early on. When Charles was just 5 years old, his mother Kathleen and her brother Luther, they got arrested. Assault and robbery, 1939.
Yeah, and that arrest immediately pulled Charles out of her care. He was sent off to live with an aunt and uncle in West Virginia, a totally disruptive start.
You do see these tiny glimpses, though, of maybe what could have been a normal childhood right after his mother was paroled in 42. He later called that short time the happiest of his life.
It's heartbreaking, almost. But it just couldn't hold. The old patterns came back, truancy, drinking sprees returned quickly. The family eventually moved to Indianapolis. And it was around then, he claimed, in that Diane Sawyer interview years later, that he set his school on fire at age 9.
Wow. Age 9. What's really fascinating, or maybe chilling, is how his entire life just immediately becomes defined by institutions. This isn't someone who, turned bad later in life. He seems like a product of the system right from the get-go.
Completely. He was sent to the Gabalt School for Boys. It's a Catholic school, apparently. But discipline there meant severe beatings, paddles, straps. He kept running away, sleeping under bridges, in the woods, just trying to escape.
And his first documented crime, 1948. It seems almost pathetic, the motive. Robbing a grocery store in Indianapolis just to get food, maybe rent a room on Skid Row, found $100 in a cigar box.
But that desperation, that act, just locked him right back into the institutional cycle. Boys Town, the Indiana Boys School, where he apparently ran away 18 times.
18 times.
Yeah, tells you something. And then the feds got involved, driving a stolen car across state lines. That landed him in the National Training School for Boys in D.C.
And when he got there, these aptitude tests showed something really stark, didn't they? This weird dichotomy.
Right. Functionally illiterate, couldn't really read or write properly. But he had an above-average IQ, 109.
So the potential was there, intellectually.
Definitely. But the system. Well, his caseworker quickly labeled him aggressively antisocial. It seems they failed to educate him, failed to rehabilitate that intelligence. It just festered.
And this is where those manipulation tactics start to really brew, isn't it, inside these places?
Exactly. While he was locked up, he developed this thing he called the insane game, When stronger kids, aggressors came at him, he'd just screech, make faces, wave his arms wildly, basically act completely insane to scare them off.
A survival
A
tactic.
survival tactic that taught him really early on how to control his environment by just manufacturing an image.
Mm.
Performance as defense.
By 1952, though, the crimes had escalated way beyond theft. Really shocking acts. At a minimum security place, Natural Bridge Honor Camp in Virginia, he was caught raping a boy at knife point.
Yeah, that's a serious escalation. And it got him transferred to Petersburg, Virginia. The records there note 8 serious disciplinary offenses, 3 involving homosexual acts. He was already deeply troubled and dangerous.
The prison environment, it really was the only structure he knew. He just kept cycling in and out. But somehow, his personal life still moved on outside. He got married.
That's bizarre, isn't it? He married Rosalie Jean Willis in 1955. They had a son, Charles Manson Jr., born while Manson Sr. was locked up at Terminal Island for car theft. But that marriage, predictably, just fractured almost immediately. His own mother told him in 1957 that Rosalie was living with another man.
And his reaction to possible parole, trying to escape just before a hearing, that sounds like self-sabotage, like he couldn't handle the outside.
It really speaks volumes, yeah. His inability to function outside those walls. He gets paroled in '58, and almost immediately, he's back to pimping a 16-year-old girl, forging checks. Just falls right back into crime.
He even married again, Leona Stevens, and there was maybe a strategic reason for that?
Possibly. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, in his book, believed Manson married her, Leona Ray, Candy Stevens, maybe so she couldn't be forced to testify against him in court. Spousal privilege. Smart in a twisted way.
The law catches up again, though, violating the Mann Act, taking the girl across state lines for prostitution, 1960. And he gets sent back to do a 10-year sentence.
Right. And while he's locked up this time, at McNeil Island, he keeps developing skills, but not, job skills. He learned steel guitar from Alvin Creepy Karpus, the notorious bank robber. He's involved in hypnosis sessions. Danny Trejo, the actor, was there too and talked about it.
So he's refining his performance, his manipulation techniques, even inside.
Constantly learning how to control people. Which brings us right up to his final official release date, March 21st, 1967. He's 32 years old.
32. And think about that number. More than half his life, over 16 years, spent institutionalized or incarcerated.
And here's the kicker, the truly chilling detail that shows the result of all that time inside. He told the authorities flat out that prison had become his home. He actually asked them, requested permission to just stay locked up.
Wow, he was scared of the outside world.
The worlds of freedom, responsibility. It was a greater unknown, a greater fear to him than maximum security, which honestly sets the stage perfectly for what comes next.
Phase 2. The prophet of Haight-Ashbury and the Hollywood Fringe. He walks out of prison and straight into the heart of the counterculture, ready to, weaponize everything he learned inside.
The timing was uncanny, wasn't it?
Yeah.
His release coincides perfectly with the run-up to the Summer of Love. Within a month, he's in Berkeley, then moves quickly to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, the absolute epicenter of the movement's idealism and, crucially, its drug use.
And he immediately latches onto the drug that defined the era, LSD acid.
Yeah, and this wasn't just casual experimentation. There were these researchers, David Smith from a health clinic, and Manson's own parole officer, Roger Smith, who were actually studying drug effects on the counterculture. David Smith noted that the change in Manson after taking LSD was the most abrupt Roger Smith had observed in his entire professional career.
It transformed him from career criminal to, what, a self-proclaimed messiah?
Pretty much. This is where his really twisted philosophy starts to crystallize. It was this bizarre, fragmented mashup of everything he'd absorbed over the years. Passages from the Bible, Dale Carnegie's self-help stuff.
How to win friends and influence people. Ironic.
Deeply ironic.
Right.
Robert Heinlein's sci-fi novel Stranger in a Strange Land, with its communal themes, the Scientology auditing he'd done in prison, like 150 hours of it, and absolutely critically, the music of the Beatles, he suddenly had this framework for control.
And he positioned himself perfectly, didn't he, as this older guru figure, someone who understood the system, the establishment, but rejected it. He started attracting followers, mostly young women, often emotionally insecure, social outcasts, people looking for belonging, for meaning.
His self-presentation was magnetic,
Yeah.
designed specifically to attract and retain those kinds of people.
Yeah.
There's that famous story, right, where a doubter actually stole the group's furnished school bus, their home, all their stuff. Some followers still inside.
Yeah, what happened?
Manson apparently showed no concern at all, just calmly said, it's coming back. And it did, within days. That display, whether it was staged or just confidence, it cemented his image as someone with, like, anti-materialistic spiritual power.
And the core groups started forming. The family. Who were the first ones?
The initial members included Mary Brenner. Surprisingly, she was a UC Berkeley library assistant, a graduate. She soon became pregnant by Manson. And Lynette Squeaky Frum, who became one of his most devoted followers.
And he fed them this ideology, that they were reincarnations of the original Christians, fighting against the Romans, meaning the establishment.
Exactly, creating an us versus them mentality right away. But the control mechanism, this reveals his cynical mastery. David Smith, that researcher, claimed Manson tried to literally reprogram his followers' minds to make them submit totally to his will.
How? Through what methods?
Smith said it was a specific combination of LSD and unconventional sexual practices, explicitly aiming to turn them into, his words, empty vessels.
Wait, so there were different levels of drug use happening? He wasn't taking as much.
That's the really dark part. Paul Watkins, a former member who later testified, confirmed this. Manson would encourage these big group LSD trips for his followers, let them surrender their grip on reality. But he intentionally took lower doses himself.
Why?
Watkins said it was so Manson could keep his wits about him, while everyone else was mentally vulnerable. It gave him total control over the programming, the suggestions, the manipulation during those trips.
That detail, it explains so much about how this manipulative ex-con transformed into a prophet figure. And this darkness, this control, it soon bumps right up against Hollywood glamour, the infamous Beach Boys connection.
Yeah, Dennis Wilson, drummer for the Beach Boys. In April 1968, he picked up two family women hitchhiking in Malibu, Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey.
And that led Manson right to his doorstep.
Directly. Manson showed up at Wilson's big house on Sunset Boulevard, 14400. Wilson later described the bizarre greeting. He came out to his driveway, and Manson just knelt down and kissed his feet. Inside, there were already about a dozen of Manson's followers, mostly women, who had basically just moved in.
Wilson was okay with this initially.
He was apparently captivated at first. Called Manson the Wizard, he housed the family, or parts of it, for about 6 months. But the women were essentially treated like servants by both Wilson and Manson. It wasn't an equal partnership.
And it cost Wilson a fortune, right?
Yeah, a massive financial disaster for him. The whole arrangement cost him roughly $100,000, and that's in 1968 dollars.
Well,
We're talking huge medical bills for gonorrhea treatment for the family women, plus replacing 2 of Wilson's uninsured luxury cars that the family just destroyed.
wow. Beyond the money, though, there was that failed music dream. That really fueled Manson's resentment later.
Definitely. Wilson did try to help him. He helped Manson record some songs at Brian Wilson's home studio.
Mm-hmm.
But then the Beach Boys reworked and recorded one of Manson's songs, Cease to Exist. They changed it slightly, retitled it Never Learn Not to Love, released it as a B-side in December '68.
And Manson wasn't credited.
Uncredited. Wilson claimed Manson had basically traded the rights for all the stuff Wilson was giving him, about $100,000 worth of stuff. Manson saw it very differently, as theft, as a deep betrayal by the establishment he was trying to break into.
The relationship clearly soured dramatically after that.
It completely fell apart. Wilson started realizing how unstable Manson actually was. He distanced himself when Manson got, in Wilson's words, into a much heavier drug situation, taking a tremendous amount of acid. The fear became really palpable.
And was that story Mike Love told about Wilson witnessing something horrific?
Yeah, Mike Love, Wilson's bandmate and cousin, recalled Dennis telling him he'd actually witnessed Manson shoot a black man in half with an M16 rifle and then hide the body down a well at Span Ranch. Now, whether that story was literally true or maybe exaggerated fear, the fear itself was absolutely real. Real enough for Wilson to just move out of his own house.
That's terrifying. It shows how far beyond just counterculture weirdness Manson had already plunged. So Wilson moves out, the family gets evicted.
Right. And Manson, showing he hadn't forgotten the music slight or the eviction, later left a single bullet with Wilson's housekeeper. A very clear, threatening message.
So their Hollywood connection is severed. They need a new base. Where do they end up?
Starting around August 1968, they settle at Spawn Ranch. It was this rundown, kind of dilapidated old Western movie set in the hills outside L.A.
And the arrangement there, the rent, it was pretty dark, wasn't it?
It reveals the depth of Manson's depravity and his control over the women. The deal was female family members had to do chores around the ranch, and critically, they had to have sex with the owner, George Spawn. He was nearly blind, about 80 years old. That was the price for free lodging.
That's where Lynette Fromm got her nickname, Squeaky.
Exactly. Apparently because she'd make a squeaking sound when Spawn, who was nearly blind, would pinch her thigh. Just grim.
Grimm is right. And the stage is now fully set for violence, isn't it? We're moving into phase 3, where this paranoid philosophy accelerates into actual preparation for mass murder, the apocalyptic ideology, and the precursors, 1968, 1969.
This is where Helter Skelter really takes hold as the driving force. Manson becomes absolutely fixated on the Beatles' White Album, released in late '68. He starts interpreting lyrics, especially from songs like Piggies, Revolution 9, and of course the track Helter Skelter itself.
He thought they were messages, prophecies.
Yes, prophecies about an imminent apocalyptic race war, a violent uprising between black and white Americans that he called Helter Skelter.
But his vision wasn't just chaos, was it? It had this really disturbing, specific outcome.
Pure, terrifying white supremacy mixed with total delusion. He preached that black people would rise up, kill off the white population. But then he believed they wouldn't be capable left to survive or lead themselves.
So where did Manson and the family fit in?
They would supposedly hide out safely during the war in some mythical bottomless pit or underground caves in Death Valley. And then, after the black population had wiped out the whites and subsequently failed, Manson and his followers would emerge to lead them, to be their master. It's just insane.
And he wasn't just waiting for this war to start on its own. He got impatient.
Exactly. He grew impatient. He believed that an album the family was planning to record and release, filled with his songs, would actually be the trigger, the catalyst to start the chaos. He needed recognition, either as a musician or as this dark prophet.
And running parallel to this huge apocalyptic delusion was something much more mundane, but just as critical. His resentment over that failed music career, the Cielo Drive obsession.
Yes, 150 Cielo Drive in Benedict Canyon. This was the house where Terry Melcher, the record producer and son of Doris Day, had been living. Melcher had listened to Manson's music, considered signing him, but ultimately refused, especially after witnessing a fight at Spawn Ranch. That rejection, that house, became a powerful symbol for Manson of his failure, of Hollywood rejecting him.
So on March 23rd, 1969, Manson actually goes to that house, uninvited.
He shows up at a 150 Cielo Drive. Melcher had already moved out. The house was now being rented by actress Sharon Tate and her husband, director Roman Polanski. Manson encountered the owner, Rudy Altobelli, who was there visiting. Altobelli was intentionally vague about where Melcher had moved to in Malibu.
And Sharon Tate saw him.
She did. She was 8 months pregnant at the time.
Hmm.
She later asked Altobelli about the creepy-looking guy she'd seen lurking around the property. The seeds were being sown.
This raises that crucial question, though. When the murders happened there later, was he targeting the house as a symbol? Or did he think Melcher was still there? Or did he know Tate and Polanski were there?
It's debated. Tex Watson, one of the killers, later claimed the family knew Melcher wasn't living there anymore. But there's conflicting information. Melcher's former roommate, Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders, claimed that Manson, or someone from his group, left a threatening note at Melcher's new place in Malibu after the rejection.
Which suggests?
It suggests the house, 150 Cielo Drive, was probably symbolic. It represented the entire establishment, the Hollywood system that had rejected him. It wasn't necessarily about Melcher still being physically present. The address was the target.
Okay. Regardless of the ultimate target for August, the actual violence started well before then. The first really extreme documented act outside of his prison history, the Crow shooting, July 1st, 1969.
Right. Tex Watson had apparently robbed a drug dealer named Bernard Lotzapapa Crow. Crow wasn't happy, obviously, and threatened retaliation against the family at Spawn Ranch.
And Manson's response?
Immediate and lethal. Manson drove to Crow's apartment in Hollywood, found him, and shot him. Didn't kill him, as it turned out, but Manson thought he had killed him.
And the paranoia just exploded after that.
Completely. Manson mistakenly believed Crow was connected to the Black Panthers. This seems to have come from misinterpreting a news report about a Black Panther member's body being dumped somewhere else entirely. He connected the dots wrongly.
So, thinking he'd killed a Black Panther, he expected immediate retaliation against his group, the Chosen Ones.
Exactly. He went into full-on defense mode, militarized Spawn Ranch, brought in members of the Straight Satan's motorcycle club for security. He was genuinely preparing for a race war that only existed in his head, triggered, he thought, by his own actions.
This paranoia, this fear, it culminates just a few weeks later in the Gary Hinman murder, end of July 1969.
Gary Hinman. He was a music teacher, a UCLA PhD student in sociology. He'd unfortunately befriended some family members, maybe even let them stay with him sometimes. This made him vulnerable, an easy target for both robbery and ideological display.
The motives seem conflicted here too, don't they? What was the official reason?
It shows how layered the manipulation was, or maybe just how chaotic things were. Susan Atkins later claimed Manson sent them there because he believed Hinman had inherited $21,000 and they were supposed to get it.
But Bobby Beausoleil, who was also there, had a different story.
Beausoleil claimed he went there to get money back from Hinman for some bad mescaline. Hinman had allegedly sold to the Straight Satan's biker gang.
Yeah.
Either way, whether it was inheritance money or drug money, it ended brutally.
How did it go down?
Hinman was held hostage in his own home for 2 days. Beausoleil was there, Mary Brunner, Susan Atkins. Manson himself showed up at one point, armed with a sword.
A sword?
Yeah, and he personally slashed Hinman's face and ear with it. A real act of intimate, brutal dominance. Then he left. Beausoleil eventually stabbed Hinman to death, allegedly on Manson's instruction because Hinman wouldn't cooperate.
And the signature they left, the writing on the wall.
That was the direct precursor to the horrors of August. Using Hinman's blood, they wrote "Political Piggy" on the wall and drew a panther paw print. This was the first explicit attempt to frame black revolutionaries for a murder committed by the family, trying to ignite helter-skelter.
That false flag operation, it leads us right into the abyss. Phase 4, the nightmares of August 1969. The violence that forever defined this cult.
Yeah, the infamous Tate LaBianca rampage. It began on the night of August 8th, 1969. Manson gathered a group. Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, who was mostly the driver. He instructed Watson to take them to that house on Cielo Drive.
Melcher's old house.
Melcher's old house.
Yeah.
And Watson later claimed Manson's instruction was chillingly specific. Go there and totally destroy everyone inside. Make it as gruesome as you can.
And the victims that night, they were so tragically disconnected from Manson himself, weren't they?
Almost completely.
Yeah.
Sharon Tate, the actress, 8.5 months pregnant. Jay Sebring, a famous celebrity hairstylist. Tate's ex-boyfriend and friend. Wojciech Frykowski, a friend of Polanski's, a Polish writer. Abigail Folger, Frykowski's girlfriend, heiress to the Folger coffee fortune. And the first victim, Stephen Parent, just an 18-year-old kid, a friend of the property's caretaker who happened to be driving away right as they arrived. Shot 4 times in his car. Wrong place, wrong time.
The entry itself sounds cold,
Very much so. Watson first climbed a pole and cut the telephone line to the house. After shooting Parent in the driveway, he went to a window, cut the screen, climbed inside, and then let Atkins and Krenwinkel in through the front door. Kasabian waited outside as a lookout.
And the psychological terror started immediately inside.
Instantly. Frykowski was asleep on the living room couch. Watson kicked him in the head to wake him up. Frykowski, terrified, asked who he was. Watson's reply. It's maybe the most chilling quote from the entire saga. "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business."
That's unbelievable. And the brutality that followed was relentless.
And personal. Sebring was shot, then stabbed 7 times, apparently for protesting how roughly they were treating the very pregnant Tate. Frykowski actually fought back hard. He managed to struggle out the front door onto the lawn, but Watson caught him, beat him over the head 13 times with the butt of his gun, and stabbed him 51 times.
51 stab wounds.
Abigail Folger also briefly escaped out another door, but was caught on the lawn by Krenwinkel and Watson, stabbed 28 times.
And Sharon Tate, her pleas were just ignored.
Completely ignored. She begged them to let her live, just long enough to have her baby. Offered herself as a hostage, it didn't matter. Atkins and Watson stabbed her 16 times. The coroner later determined the cause of death was massive hemorrhage and noted she was likely still alive when they briefly strung her up with the nylon ropes they'd used to restrain her and Sebring earlier.
And as they left, that final act, writing on the door.
Atkins used Tate's blood to write the word pig on the front door. She later claimed in custody this was intended as a copycat of the Hinman murder, trying to reinforce that false flag narrative to help get Bobby Beausoleil freed. But Watson recalled Manson specifically wanting something witchy done.
Manson wasn't satisfied with this. He thought it was sloppy.
Apparently, yes. He felt the scene was too chaotic, maybe didn't send the right helter-skelter message clearly enough. So the very next night, August 10th, the violence escalated, and this time Manson went along.
He participated directly.
He went with the group initially. Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, Kasabian again, but also Leslie Van Houten and Steve Clem Grogan. Manson apparently directed them to find another house. They ended up choosing, seemingly at random, the home of Lino LaBianca, a supermarket executive, and his wife Rosemary in the Los Feliz area.
Was it truly random?
Seemingly random victims, yes. But the house itself wasn't entirely random. It was located next door to a house where some family members had attended a party about a year earlier. So there was a faint geographical connection, at least.
And Manson went inside this time.
Watson claimed Manson went in first, alone, found Lino LaBianca asleep, and tied him up with a leather thong. Then Manson allegedly went back out to the car, woke up Rosemary LaBianca, who was also sleeping, brought her back to the bedroom, and then sent Watson and Krenwinkel inside to commit the murders, while he drove off with Atkins, Grogan, and Kasabian, supposedly to find another victim.
So Watson and Krenwinkel went in and Van Houten joined them.
Yes. Watson, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten went inside. They took Rosemary to the bedroom, tied her up too, and put pillowcases over both Lino's and Rosemary's heads, securing them with lamp cords.
And the scene inside, even more focused on that helter-skelter imagery.
Far more gratuitous, yes. Watson stabbed Lino repeatedly with a chrome-plated bayonet, maybe 12 times. Then he carved the word war into Lino's abdomen.
God. What about Rosemary?
Rosemary apparently fought back fiercely in the bedroom. She started swinging a lamp that was still tied around her neck by the cord. She fought Krenwinkel and Van Houten until Watson came in and subdued her, stabbing her repeatedly with the bayonet as well.
And Van Houten's role, she participated in the stabbing.
Yes. Testimony indicated she stabbed Rosemary multiple times, possibly around 16 times, mostly in the lower back and buttocks. Though, crucially, the coroner testified many of those wounds were likely inflicted post-mortem after Rosemary was already dead.
And more writing in blood, more messages.
More explicit, helter-skelter messages this time. Krenwinkel used Lino's blood to write "Rise and Death to Pigs" on the walls, and famously misspelled helter-skelter on the refrigerator door.
Helter-skelter.
Yeah. And as a final grotesque touch, Krenwinkel left a carving fork sticking directly out of Lino's stomach and a steak knife lodged in his throat.
Was that the end of the night? Or did they plan more?
There was apparently one more intended victim. After leaving the LaBianca house, Manson, who had picked up Watson, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten, drove towards Venice Beach to supposedly kill an actor named Saladin Nader, whom Linda Kasabian knew.
But it didn't happen.
Kasabian claims she deliberately thwarted it. She led them to the wrong apartment building, or knocked on the wrong door, creating confusion and delay until Manson gave up. It's one reason she later got immunity. She hadn't physically killed anyone and had potentially prevented another murder.
And the final act before returning to the ranch.
It's just pure contempt. Susan Atkins apparently defecated in the stairwell of the apartment building on the way out. A final, disgusting signature.
The horror of those two nights, Tate and LaBianca, it's hard enough to comprehend. But this brings us to Phase 5. And this reveals the truly frightening potential scope of the family's violence. The web of suspected murders. Because those 9 convictions, they seem like just the confirmed tip of a really horrifying iceberg.
Absolutely. The scale's potentially vast and impossible to quantify precisely. The LAPD, over the years, has indicated they believe the family might have been responsible for up to 12 more victims beyond the 9 they were convicted for.
And didn't the prosecutor, Stephen Kay, mention a higher number Manson claimed?
Yeah, Kay quoted Manson himself as bragging at one point about being responsible for 35 murders. Now, was that bravado, delusion, or closer to the truth? We just don't know. Deborah Tate, Sharon's sister, certainly believed investigators were just scraping the surface. She even recalled getting a taunting map from Manson in prison years later, with crosses marking potential burial locations out in the desert.
So, beyond Tate LaBianca and Hinman, there is one more confirmed secondary murder linked directly to them, right? Donald Shorty Shea.
Yes. Donald Shea. He was a stuntman and sometimes ranch hand at Spawn Ranch. He was murdered later that same month, around August 26, 1969, shortly after the Tate LaBianca killings.
Why was he targeted?
Multiple reasons, it seems. Manson suspected Shea might have been an informant, possibly tipping off the police about stolen cars, which led to a big raid on the ranch on August 16th that disrupted everything. Also, crucially, Manson, with his intense white supremacist views, apparently strongly disapproved of the fact that Shea, a white man, was married to a black woman named Magdalene.
And his death was brutal.
Extremely brutal. Testimony suggests he was lured to a remote part of the ranch, ambushed, tortured, hit with a pipe wrench by Clem Grogan, stabbed repeatedly by Tex Watson. Ernest Davis was there too. Davis later recalled Manson handing him a machete, but he couldn't bring himself to use it, just sort of cut Shea's shoulder with the tip of a bayonet instead, and then sickeningly asked Manson, "Are you satisfied, Charlie?"
Where was his body? Did they find it right away?
No, his remains weren't found for 8 years. They were finally recovered in 1977 after Clayne Grogan, who was convicted for the murder along with Manson and Davis, eventually agreed to cooperate and drew a map leading investigators to Shay's shallow grave on a hillside near the ranch. The autopsy confirmed the torture on the multiple stab and chopping wounds, blunt force trauma.
Okay, so Shay is confirmed. But now we get into the cold cases, the suspected links, and what's terrifying here is the consistency in some of the methods, suggesting this pattern of extreme, often really disorganized violence might have started before Tate LaBianca.
Exactly. Let's look at some of them. We can go back to October 1968 in Ukiah, Northern California. Two women, Nancy Warren and Clyda Delaney, were found beaten and strangled. Not just strangled, but strangled with 36 separate leather thongs.
36. That's
Yeah,
absurd.
very specific, very unusual. And the family was known to be camping and active in that Ukiah area around that time. It's a tantalizing but ultimately unproven link. No charges were ever filed.
Then there's Marina Elizabeth Habe, December 1968, West Hollywood.
Right. A 17-year-old student, abducted from outside her mother's home, found later near Mulholland Drive. Her throat was slashed, numerous knife wounds, and she'd been garroted. Again, a former family associate later suggested they might have been involved. And the method, the garroting, the multiple stab wounds, shares disturbing elements, with another case we'll get to, the Jurvetson murder.
In a really dark, almost unbelievable twist, Manson's own uncle might have been a victim. May 1969.
Yeah, his uncle, Darwin Morrell Scott, in Kentucky, found brutally stabbed 19 times, pinned to his own kitchen floor with a butcher knife. It's incredibly violent. And records show Manson was actually out of touch with his parole officers right around that time. Plus, there were reports of a man resembling Manson, using the alias Preacher, seen near his uncle's home shortly before the murder. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not.
And just before the August 69 murders, Mark Waltz, July 1969.
Mark Waltz, 16 years old. He knew the family, hung around Spawn Ranch sometimes, found shot 3 times in the chest near Mulholland Drive. His own brother was so convinced Manson was responsible that he apparently called Manson directly to accuse him. But again, police couldn't establish a concrete link.
Then we have the death of John Philip Haught. 0, a family member himself. November 1969, this one sounds suspicious.
Extremely suspicious. Haught had been arrested in the big October '69 raid on the family's desert commune after the murders. Manson apparently suspected him of being an informant, a snitch. He died in a house in Venice, California, officially ruled a suicide from playing Russian roulette.
But the details don't add up for Russian roulette, do they?
Not at all. The gun, a .22 revolver, reportedly had 7 live bullets and only 1 spent shell casing inside. That's not Russian roulette. Plus, the gun was immediately wiped clean of fingerprints, and another family member claimed she saw a female follower, maybe Catherine Gypsy Share, holding the gun right after the shot. It strongly suggests a staged suicide, an execution to silence a potential informant.
Also in November 69, close to the LaBianca house, James Sharp and Doreen Gall.
2 young Scientologists. James was only 15, Doreen was 19. Found stabbed over 50, maybe 60 times each, in an alley near the LaBianca residence. Police immediately noted the terrifying similarity in the sheer overkill, the frenzy of stab wounds, to the Tate LaBianca attacks. There were rumors Doreen Gall might have been a former girlfriend of family member Bruce Davis, who lived nearby, but he denied knowing her well. Unsolved.
Reed Jurvetson's case, that sounds particularly gruesome. Also November 69.
It is. Her body was unidentified for decades, known only as Jane Doe #59. Found off Mulholland Drive, not far from the Tate residence. She had been stabbed over 150 times, mostly with a small penknife. Just absolute overkill. Detectives noted what they called striking similarities between her murder and the earlier murder of Marina Hyde, the location, the disposal, the sheer excess of the stabbing. Manson later denied any involvement when asked about her specifically.
And the violence even reached overseas. Joel Pugh, December 1969.
Joel Pugh. He was technically married to family member Sandra Good, found dead in a London hotel room, wrists cut, throat slit. British authorities ruled it a suicide, but prosecutor Stephen Kay stated Manson openly hated Pugh. Sandra Good herself later called it the first of the retaliation murders. And who happened to be in London right around that time? Bruce Davis. Another deeply suspicious death.
Even the trial itself wasn't safe. The disappearance of Ronald Hughes, Leslie Van Houten's lawyer.
Yeah, this is chilling. Hughes disappeared during a trial recess in November 1970 while camping near Sespe Hot Springs. His badly decomposed body was found months later, in March 1971, wedged between boulders. No clear cause of death could be determined due to decomposition.
But the suspicion was family involvement.
Strong suspicion. Manson had shown open contempt for Hughes in court. The rumor, never proven but persistent, was that the family murdered him because Hughes was refusing to go along with Manson's plan to have Ann Houghton completely absolve Manson on the witness stand. Sandra Good, again, called this another retaliation murder. It shows the potential reach, the intimidation, even with Manson locked up.
Years later, in 1972, the Willett murders. This sounds like a planned execution, too.
James and Lauren Willett. James was a Vietnam veteran. His body was found near Guerneville, California. He'd apparently been forced to dig his own grave before being shot. His station wagon was later found outside a house in Stockton where several family followers were living, including Lynette Fromm and Nancy Pittman.
And his wife.
When police raided that Stockton house, they found the recently shot body of James's 19-year-old wife, Lauren Willett, buried in the basement. The family members arrested there initially claimed her death was an accident, a gun mishap, but later suggestions were that she was deliberately killed because they feared she would reveal who had murdered her husband. 4 family associates were eventually convicted in relation to these murders.
And finally, even years after the main crimes, the murders connected to the Manson documentary film from 1973.
Right. Lawrence Merrick, the director of that Oscar-nominated documentary, was shot in the back and killed outside his LA studio in 1977. The confessed killer, Dennis Mignano, was found legally insane, but authorities noted he had a possible prior relationship with the Manson clan.
And then his sister.
Just 6 months later, Dennis Mignano's sister, Raquel Mignano, was found murdered execution style in her car in Michigan. Multiple gunshot wounds, died from exsanguination. Her murder has never been solved. Was it retaliation related to her brother killing Merrick? Was there a family connection? It's another disturbing loose end.
The true scope. It's just terrifying to contemplate. So with this widespread violence, this potential body count, how did investigators finally break through that wall of silence and deception for the main Tate LaBianca case?
That leads us right into Phase 6, the trial of the century and the enduring cult. The investigation, the trial, and the bizarre fallout that continued for decades.
It really came down to Susan Atkins talking, didn't it?
It did. After being arrested and booked for the Gary Hinman murder, she was transferred to the Sybil Brand Institute for Women in L.A. And apparently, she just couldn't keep silent. She started bragging, essentially, to her bunkmates, Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham, detailing the horrific events of the Tate LaBianca murders, showing this bizarre pride in her involvement, especially in killing Sharon Tate.
And they went to the authorities.
They did. They relayed the information. That was the breakthrough the LAPD needed. It corroborated other leads they were starting to develop, and it led directly to warrants being issued for Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian in early December 1969.
The physical evidence played a role too, like finding the gun.
Absolutely. Part luck, part good police work. That .22 caliber, high-standard buntline special revolver that Watson used at Cielo Drive, it was actually found back in September '69 by a 10-year-old boy named Stephen Weiss who lived near the Tate residence. He found it discarded near his home, and his father turned it over to the police. Ballistics tests later definitively matched slugs recovered for the victims and the scene to that specific gun. Huge piece of evidence.
And Linda Kasabian, she became the star witness.
The absolutely critical key prosecution witness. Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor, made a deal. Since Kasabian hadn't physically participated in the killings herself and had arguably thwarted the Nader murder, she was granted immunity in exchange for her detailed testimony. Her account provided the narrative framework, the step-by-step story of those chaotic, terrifying nights.
But getting that testimony and running the trial wasn't easy. There was constant intimidation, right?
Oh, absolutely. The courtroom itself became a stage for chaos and blatant intimidation tactics designed to derail the whole process. Family members, easily identified by those X's they started carving into their foreheads, copying Manson, marking their separation from the establishment, they would just loiter near the court entrances. Some were seen visibly wearing sheathed hunting knives on their belts, trying to spook jurors, witnesses, everyone.
And they actively tried to silence witnesses who were going to testify against them.
Definitely. Key prosecution witnesses like Paul Watkins and Juan Flynn received threats. Watkins, who provided crucial testimony about the helter-skelter motive, was badly burned in a suspicious fire in his van during the trial. And then there was that incredibly audacious attempt in Hawaii.
A poisoned hamburger.
Yeah. Ruth Ann Morehouse, another family member, allegedly gave Barbara Hoyt, a former family member who had overheard Susan Atkins describing the Tate murders, a hamburger spiked with several massive doses of LSD. The intent was clearly to either kill her or scramble her mind so badly she couldn't testify.
Did it work?
No. Hoyt survived, though she was terrified. And that attempt on her life actually solidified her resolve. She lost any previous hesitation and testified in full damaging detail against the family. But Manson himself made sure the trial was pure theater.
That X on the forehead.
On the very first day of testimony, he dramatically turned to the cameras and carved that X into his forehead, declared he had X'd himself from the establishment's world. And instantly, the female defendants in the courtroom with him, Atkins, Krenwinkel, Van Houten, copied the mark onto their own foreheads. A terrifying show of cult unity and defiance.
The judge, Charles Older, must have had a nightmare trying to maintain control.
Constant struggle. After President Nixon, in a massive breach of protocol, publicly declared Manson guilty while the trial was still ongoing, well, that caused chaos. The female defendants stood up in unison, turned their backs on the judge, and basically said there was no point continuing the trial.
And Manson actually attacked the judge at one point.
He tried to. Leapt over the defense table towards Judge Older. Bailiffs tackled him. After that, Older allegedly started carrying a revolver under his robes for protection. He eventually had to ban Manson and the women from the courtroom entirely for long stretches because of their continuous disruptive outbursts and chanting.
How was the defense strategy? It seems like they didn't have much of one.
It was fascinatingly weak, perhaps because Manson was advising them from behind the scenes. Their main strategy was to claim the women had planned and committed the Tate LaBianca murders themselves without Manson's direction, the motive. To act as copycat crimes to free Bobby Beausoleil, who was already charged with the Hinman murder.
They tried to frame Kasabian.
Yeah, they even tried to paint Linda Kasabian as the true mastermind, suggesting she was secretly in love with Beausoleil and orchestrated the whole thing. It was desperate.
And it fell apart.
Completely collapsed under cross-examination. The weakest link was Susan Atkins. She couldn't logically explain why. If the whole point was just to copy the Hinman murder scene to free Beausoleil, she had written Political Piggy at Hinman's house in the first place. It made no sense under their copycat theory. The prosecution, led by Bugliosi, successfully countered with the comprehensive helter-skelter motive, connecting all the dots, the writings, the prophecies, Manson's control.
So the verdict came in January 71.
Yes. After almost a year of trial chaos, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 27 separate counts against the four main defendants, Manson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten. They were all sentenced to death.
But they weren't executed?
No, the sentences were automatically commuted to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole in 1972. This happened because the California Supreme Court temporarily ruled the state's death penalty statute unconstitutional in a case called People v. Anderson. So they all ended up serving life sentences instead.
Despite the convictions, that loyalty, it endured for decades, didn't it?
Disturbingly so. Lynette Squeaky Fromm, who wasn't charged in the main murders but remained fiercely loyal, attempted to assassinate President Gerald Ford in Sacramento in 1975. Pointed a gun at him. She later claimed she did it partly to try and get closer to Manson, who was imprisoned nearby, because she'd heard a rumor he had testicular cancer and wanted to help him.
Wow. And Sandra Good.
Sandra Good, another core follower, was convicted in the mid-70s for sending hundreds of threatening letters to corporate executives she blamed for environmental pollution. Served about 10 years for that. The devotion was deep and lasting for some.
Manson in prison. He continued the performance, didn't he? The swastika tattoo?
Oh, yeah. He eventually shaved his head entirely and replaced the X on his forehead with a crudely tattooed swastika. Gave rambling, often bizarre interviews over the years. Claimed to be bisexual at one point, saying something like, "Sex to me is like going to the toilet. I'm not hung up in that game." Always deflecting, always performing.
He was denied parole repeatedly.
Consistently. He had 12 parole hearings, but skipped all of them after 1997. The parole board always cited his complete lack of remorse, his long history of controlling behavior, and his failure to understand the devastating impact of his crimes. Early psych evaluations mentioned schizophrenia, paranoid delusions. Later researchers often leaned more towards psychopathy, maybe bipolar disorder. He remained a danger.
We can't forget that bizarre engagement story near the end of his life. To Afton Elaine Burton, star.
Yeah, that was strange. In 2014, when he was 80, he got a marriage license to marry Afton Burton, who was 26 and had been visiting him for years. But the license expired. One journalist reported Manson discovered her alleged motive was to marry him so she could gain control of his corpse after his death and put it on display as a tourist attraction.
Seriously?
That was the report. Manson apparently believed he was immortal and would never die, so he maybe toyed with the marriage idea just to keep her visiting and bringing him things. Who knows the real truth there? It was just another layer of weirdness.
And his actual death, when did that happen?
Charles Manson died in November 2017, age 83. officially from cardiac arrest resulting from respiratory failure, which was brought on by complications from colon cancer.
Was there a fight over his remains?
A bizarre legal battle, yeah. Between his grandson, Jason Freeman, son of Charles Manson Jr., a pen pal named Michael Channels who claimed Manson left him everything in a will, and another man claiming to be an illegitimate son. The court eventually sided with the grandson, Freeman.
And what happened to his body?
He was cremated, and Jason Freeman scattered his ashes privately on a California hillside in March 2018, finally ending the physical presence of the man who really became the dark icon of the 1960s.
When we look back, the lasting cultural impact of the family, it's undeniable, isn't it? How Manson, through just sheer force of personality, manipulation, this twisted ideology, he cobbled together from pop culture the Beatles, Stranger in a Strange Land.
Right.
He managed to weaponize the counterculture itself, took that promise of free love, peace, and turned it into a justification for bloodshed and paranoia that, honestly, still haunts Hollywood and true crime history today.
It really does. The way the family moved so easily between the fringes, the desert communes, and the world of celebrities, and committed these incredibly savage acts. It fundamentally shattered a sense of innocence from that era. The message seemed to be that chaos, horrific violence could erupt from anywhere, even from your seemingly harmless neighbors.
And despite those high-profile convictions for Tate LaBianca, Hinman, Shea, those shadows of the suspected murders, they just linger, don't they? From Marina Hab, the garroted student, to Lawrence Merrick, the murdered documentary director, and his sister.
It leaves you wondering about the true scope. If police really believe they might have been responsible for a dozen, maybe dozens more victims. What does that say about the actual depth of the family's darkness, far beyond the murders that made the headlines?
So, maybe the final question, the most terrifying legacy here. Is it just that Manson was a unique psychopathic monster? Or is the deeper horror maybe that his followers, most of them, weren't born monsters? They were recruited, often insecure, lost young people, and then skillfully, terrifyingly engineered into killers. Does it ultimately prove the horrifying power of absolute psychological control?
It's a chilling thought to end on, what people are capable of under that kind of influence.
Okay, so we hope you liked our today's discussion. For more such discussions, subscribe to our channel, Phantom Homicide.